I'd like to welcome my speakers on stage with me. I'll be introducing them in just a few minutes. Let me start off by thanking the organizers of the Paris Cyber Summits, and in particular, Sébastien Garneau and his team, for bringing us together for such an important discussion. My name is Arthur Liedekerke. I'm European Affairs Director at Rasmussen Global, the political advisory firm of the former NATO Secretary General. And I'm honored and delighted to be moderating this session with three seasoned diplomats and experts today. I think the talks before us did a good job of reminding us of the very concrete, real benefits that AI can bring to our societies. Despina Spanu certainly did an excellent job of reminding us of the risks and threats that the uptake of this technology can also entail. But today, with our discussion, with our panelists, I want to focus on regulation, how much we should regulate, if we should regulate, and of course, whom. Today, the world, many countries, most countries in the world, there seems to be relative consensus on the fact that something must be done to harness this technology, but divergences, differences remain on what needs to be policed, how, and by whom. So to discuss this today with me, I have the pleasure of having Ambassador Ernst Noorman. Ambassador Noorman has a long career with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as with other ministries. Before taking up his position as Ambassador at Large for Cyber Affairs, he served the post of 13 years as Ambassador for the Kingdom of the Netherlands in various postings, and before that you were at the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Home Affairs and Kingdom Relations. I have Ambassador Annemarie Engtoft Meldgaard, and you are Denmark's tech ambassador with responsibility for representing the Danish government to the global tech industry and leading Danish efforts in global technology governance. Before that, before taking this appointment, you were at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, where you led its work on the Fourth Industrial Revolution and global public goods. And last but certainly not least, I have Ambassador Massimo Marotti. Ambassador Marotti, you have a long and distinguished career with the Italian Diplomatic Corps in Public Administration. You are currently serving as the Managing Director for Strategies and International Cooperation with Italy's National Cybersecurity Agency, and you've held the position previously of Ambassador to Lebanon, to Iraq, as well as diplomatic postings to the Embassy of Italy in the US and its permanent mission to the United Nations in New York. The introductions are done, so let's dive straight into the matter at hand today. And Ambassador Marotti, I turn to you for a bit of a scene setter. Can you maybe, and we had this discussion, you and I, a bit over dinner yesterday, provide your perspective, your concise overview of the benefits and risks that this technology and the adoption of artificial intelligence can entail for our societies?
Thank you. Sorry, can you hear me? The benefits and risks or costs is a kind of binary thinking. I like it for make it easier in a way. We certainly have in front of our eyes the pace of the digital transformation and the growth of the general purpose technologies on one hand, with an immediate benefit in terms of what we can imagine in more productivities, easier decision-making process. On the other side, the risk is mainly what is probably the unintended consequences that we might encounter in dealing with technologies that not only change human activities, but also affect the cognitive process, kind of like a little bit like the writing, the first probably great invention that put us together where we are now. And thinking about that, a couple of weeks ago, I was reading an article on the conversation. It was a survey of Associated Press that stated that more than 50% of the journalists interviewed, they were using artificial intelligence for drafting, collecting data, and writing in a way. And the reflection on this article was also certainly this is an improving in productivity, a boost for the business of newspapers. But the question was also, how about the relationship between journalists and readers, which is at the bottom of the business of journalism in a way, and also in the process of developing and shaping our ideas. If a journalist which conceive an idea and work on it and expand it while writing, start with already a finished product in front of him or her, make it more like an editor than a journalist. And this image, in a way, was a clear explanation of what we have in front of us. There is certainly many benefits that we can get from this new technology and the application of these new technologies, but we have also the realm of risks and, most of all, the unintended consequences. And this, I think, is the point which is at the base of the debate on regulation, more and who.
Thank you, Massimo. And you know, kind of piggybacking on your concept of unintended consequences, I turn to you, Ambassador Noorman, to you know, with your role as ambassador for cyber affairs, in part connected to these potential unintended consequences, have you seen the cyber threat landscape evolve dramatically as a result of AI? You know, I don't know, becoming more complex, more fast-paced, and already maybe start kind of teasing us as to whether you think regulation is potentially helpful to enhance our resilience on these cyber aspects?
Well, thank you, Arthur, for this question. It's quite interesting, actually. When I started in my present capacity less than a year ago, AI was not in my job description. And it is quite weird, isn't it, actually? Only within a couple of weeks, I would say, months, I mean, AI was all over my job description, I would say. Every discussion on cybersecurity was also included discussion on AI. And the discussion was time and again, will it help us or will it harm us? What I like about the AI discussion, you know, if you look back to when ChatGPT was launched in 2022, it was either doom or heaven in the discussions on ChatGPT and the generative AI. And now you see a more balanced discussion and, you know, really analyzing, okay, what are the benefits, what are the disadvantages, how to cope with these disadvantages. Now, with regard to cybersecurity, I've been talking a lot with experts. I was in San Francisco in the RSA, and then you also had a chance to talk with companies. We had a wonderful tech retreat, thanks to Anna-Marie, organized together with Australia, where we also had this discussion. And of course, the general thing is that the jury is still out. You know, it's still, we have a lot of unknowns what will really happen on cybersecurity in the area because of AI. But at the same time, the general consensus, you could say, is that AI will be the advantage for the defender side. That's more and more what I hear also from big tech companies, also in the Netherlands. They say, you know, we use it a lot already. AI is being used intensively to defend ourselves. And we feel it's more in an advantage that we are better to analyze the vulnerabilities in our system, to monitor our system. So in that sense, we feel that it helps us. At the same time, was also a recent report by National Cybersecurity Center together with the National Intelligence Agency. And they warned really also for the threats of, you know, targeting humans in the system. And through deepfakes, through using generative AI to really target individuals in the organizations. And there you see that still the human factor is the vulnerable part often in companies. There's still the wish to click on credible emails, you know, links to documents you hope, and then of course the system can be harmed. And also there's a warning that AI, generative AIs, may also attack AI systems. And we still don't know, you know, who will be in the end the stronger part of it. So it's a lot of uncertainty, but the good news is that I felt that at least the general consensus was that it will help us. Key is also, I would say, that we always say in the Netherlands, I would say in the international community, that cybersecurity is a team sport. We really have to work together. The private sector, the NGOs, international organizations and national governments have to work together to share information to help each other. We have I would say an excellent example, the Circle of Trust in the Netherlands. That's the top 10 biggest companies in the domain of digitalization. ASML is part of that, of course. Philips is part of that, but other companies. And they look also at their own value chain. Like ASML has 1,800 companies supplying parts to ASML. And they take up the responsibility to make sure that all these companies have their house in order, that their cybersecurity is in order. As that's, of course, crucial also for the security of ASML. But I think it's an excellent example that companies take the responsibility, the big mature companies, to help also small and medium-sized companies improving their systems. Now on regulation, I think that's crucial. Of course, within the EU, we are busy with the NIS2 directive. We are a bit behind in the Netherlands. We have to make some steps to implement it much quicker. But that's a crucial point. The Cyber Resilience Act, I think, is crucial to make products secure by design, and also secure by default. And it's still, in many systems, if you receive it, it's still with standard passwords, standard security options, and not the real secure options. You have to know where to find them. And in general, user of systems do not know it, so that's also an obligation. And I think at a certain point, we're going to introduce also liability, that companies will be liable if they deliver products which are not secure. So that's what I would say, that the regulation is crucial as part of the cybersecurity, but it's also teamwork for all of us together.
Thank you, Ambassador. And certainly, I take comfort in you saying that defense has the edge, potentially, thanks to AI. Ambassador Engtoft, Meldgaard, I turn to you. I assume you had AI in your job description when you took up the post. So I want to quote you in a recent interview, or an interview you gave to Politico a few months back, where you said, "The referee cannot win the game. You do not become an AI leader simply by regulating it. You need to be able to innovate too." So I wonder if you could elaborate on how we do it and how we avoid being sidelined by clamping down too much on this technology in the EU.
That quote made me very popular in Brussels, I can tell you all. First of all, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back in Paris. Thank you for spending the day on this beautiful, sunny summer day in Paris with us inside. I'm a tremendous supporter of the EU AI Act. And this is the first time not only a nation, but an entire region said there is this enormous potential in a technology that we've known for decades, but that we haven't fully seen its potential of yet. And that was sort of unleashed as what almost felt like a natural force in society over the past now year and a half. And it started, as both my panelists here said, with sort of an extreme skepticism over sort of an acute optimism, and now to a place where we're starting to understand it's probably not changing all the world's problems tomorrow, neither is it causing it. It's somewhere in between, and it's still a technology in its infancy in terms of being used. What I meant with that quote, and what I think is important for Europe, is I'm very delighted to be meeting with Mistral later today. But when we look at the landscape, there are far too few leading companies in artificial intelligence in Europe. On all my trips, I used to be based out of Silicon Valley. I'm now based in Copenhagen. I go back every 2 months. And every single trip, what I meet most of is Europeans who decided not to build their AI companies here. When they meet the 50 people mark and the need for investments of about 8 digits, they travel west. A few of them travel east, but most of them travel west. I believe that it would be much more purposeful and meaningful for them to stay and scale in Europe, and it will be necessary for Europe. We perfected the art of using American technology. We're incredibly good at it. I mean, that's part of, so many of our countries have digitized rapidly and have really used it for economic security, economic success, opportunities, digitizing our public services, my own government being one of the best examples of it. But I think in the current geopolitical climate, recognizing that it is not enough just to buy other people's technology, you have to be a maker of it. Because what happens is that every time we regulate technologies that are not also created here, where we don't have a stronghold, we regulate on the back of it. We try to regulate on the use of it once it's sort of the leash and the force is unleashed in society. And so by insisting that you gotta be a player in the game and not only a referee, for me it's really going back to the basic of Europe. We invented the first and the second industrial revolution. It's not that Europeans are not innovative or we're not tech savvy, quite the contrary. We have the highest number of AI experts per capita. We also have the highest number of AI experts per capita leaving the union. And so what I think is most important now is, one, making the EU AI Act work. It's an incredible and landmark piece of legislation. There's going to be an incredible landmark piece of bureaucracy on our side to implement it meaningfully. And ensuring that it's not only, I think, people with sort of the traditional technical knowledge, but that are advanced in artificial intelligence, that know how to implement it in a meaningful way. And at the same time, figure out what does it take for Europe to be a technological superpower. One, admit that we are not currently. Two, start thinking about what does it look like, not only for France or Denmark or the Netherlands or Italy, each of us to try and do this, but as a European Union. And that's why I've been delighted, I think, not only to see this, what is left of the current commission, a few months yet, in terms of investments in artificial intelligence and setting, I think, ambitious strategic objectives for this, but also very much going into the next commission, which I think will be looking a lot more at economic security. And economic security in that lens is also around the ability to be part of a geopolitical game where we have a chance of being not just the third or the fourth, but maybe a meaningful third.
Thank you very much. And maybe let me stay with you, because you mentioned the fact that now we need to make the AI work, the AI Act work. You alluded to some of the skepticism, differences at its onset between different member states, between Brussels and the member states, between stakeholders. I think given the pace of developments in the field of AI, we can't exclude that further down the line we'll have to look at the issue again and revamp the current legislation. Can you maybe touch on some of the divergences that may remain between how member states approach the issue, and certainly how I heard you allude to concepts like domestic technology, maybe even digital sovereignty, although you didn't explicitly reference that, but how has that kind of infused in the thinking of certain capitals in looking at the current framework?
I will actually say I've been surprised to see how much consensus there have been on technology, and not least AI. I mean, for those of you who spend a lot of time in Brussels, there are a lot of really intense discussions on all sort of issues. But on this, I actually find it to be a rather consensus. One that's saying Europe wants to go ahead and be the first one to regulate on the very, very negative harms, what both my panelists spoke to. We recognize also that this is not a level playing field where each member state come with the same capacity. I mean, right now, I think 5 or 6 member states have a supercomputer, so that means most of the member states do not have one, or different levels of capability, of competences, of skills, of educators on this. Not to mention right now, there are 2, European AI companies. One is German, one is French. And so there is discrepancies in how we are approaching this. What the EU AI Act does is less on that side and more on the harmful use, and I think we found a good degree of consensus. I do believe that in the next commission and in the next stretch, it is going to be a discussion on how do we interpret economic security. I come from a small country that has grown to be one of the most, on sort of GDP per capita, one of the most wealthy nations in this world, based on open free trade. We are an open free market economy. We've been so ever since the Vikings sort of set sail outside. The world is also changing, and we're not naive to the fact that it does not look like it did yesterday. So I think striking the right balance between protecting and promoting, partnering, figuring out how we do that with countries outside of the EU, that is going to be key. In the US, there's a lot of discussion on this concept of small yard, high fence. And it's such a wonderful concept because it doesn't really say anything, right? How small is the yard? How high is the fence? Does the yard extend sometimes? Who can run in and out of the yard? And so these questions on where do we see the need for protectionism? What does that protectionism translate to? And for Europe, it is obviously necessary that economic security and industrial policy here can not only benefit 2 nations or 3 nations. And at the same time, we gotta be realistic about the fact that not all nations have the same capabilities. So that is gonna be a hard nut to crack. I do wanna say just a last point on this. I don't think there's ever been a case study where someone could protect their way to success. In this game, it's really about innovating your way to success, promoting your way to success. And so by recognizing the Danes, we like to call it open strategic autonomy. And that's the beauty about words. You can sort of combine them in ways that they make national sense, and maybe some will say, but then is that then digital sovereignty or not? I think it is for us really sort of a balance between recognizing that we can probably not continue as we've done until now. There is a need and there's an opportunity for strategic industrial policy in Europe, specifically targeted at high-tech sectors, and at the same time a need for not closing off entirely.
Thank you, very interesting. So maybe, Massimo, I turn to you since we're moved on to the topic of partnering with other countries outside of the EU. Italy is at the helm of the G7. Last year, we saw the Japanese presidency, under its stewardship, agree the Hiroshima artificial intelligence process. I think we're 10 days away, roughly, from the Apulia summit. And I wanted to, pick your brains on what you're hoping to see come out of the G7 summit on AI, if you can share some sneak preview.
Well, not much preview because I will not spoil the surprise. Not that I know what the debate will be at the summit, but we are certainly all looking forward to it. G7 is mainly means cooperation, means working together, and the group, when a country, when as the presidency goes into long process of meeting, more than 20 ministerial, 50 working groups, so lots of debate all along here. But the key one is the summit. And the leaders, the Italian Prime Minister put artificial intelligence among the top topics, most important topics for debate. And I suppose that we will have also a discussion on the issues, on the topics that we are also debating here, innovation and regulations, how to put the human beings at the center of the process. There is moral, ethics, politics involved in this discussion. We also had the opportunity to have a new working group at G7 level for the Agency and Center for Cybersecurity, and adding to the group discussion an issue of security that was not addressed before. The G7 talk about cyber for many years now, and you mentioned the relevant process that have been at the center of discussion and policy. But there's also a policy for cybersecurity, and we tried this year, 2 weeks ago in Rome, we had a meeting with the agencies of the 7 and the European Union and the Commission, debating artificial intelligence for cybersecurity, in the terms of what could make the system safer in a way, how we can work together to reach this objective, and also how to use artificial intelligence for cybersecurity, how we can counter the increasing and growing use of artificial intelligence and the digital market, also for crime and for all the malicious activity that we know, including the disinformation. And we immediately had among the people working on this subject a way to interact. We had 2 weeks later another meeting in video conference, and we are addressing all the topics that are on a daily basis on the table: how to protect critical infrastructure, including the government as a critical infrastructure, from those activities. How to push for innovation, because this is part, having an innovative environment is part of the resilience of a single state, a single nation, but also of the group, of the larger community. Up to the better way to also invest and act in capacity building, because we need also, you address it, the point, we have also to work at the same time on the digital divide that generates more and more instability and certainly reduce the chances that we have to profit for the large opportunities, set of opportunities that this new technology guarantee to all of us. And this also will be at the center of the debate in Apulia. Only 2 weeks to know if this was the result.
Thank you, Massimo, and we'll be watching out for what comes out of the G7 Apulia summit. Ernst, we've talked about the EU level, the AI Act, about not regulating, but certainly addressing standards, norms in a G7 context. I'd like to turn to you for a more national perspective. I know the Netherlands has recently put out its government-wide vision on generative AI. For the benefit of our audience, could you maybe comment on some of its more distinctive aspects? If I'm not mistaken, certainly the strong connection it draws between AI, ethics, and human rights.
Yes, I really would like to do that. But first come back to what Annemarie mentioned, and I would like really to support that. That it was also for me really interesting to see, or fascinating to see, that actually on cybersecurity and AI and security, there is agreement that we are not so much in those discussions polarized. You published recently a new strategy. We published last year a cybersecurity strategy. The US did also recently. And we're all confident that those strategies will hold even after elections, whoever will win the elections. And that's quite special because, I mean, in these days we have such a polarized society and you see things change from one side to the other side. But this is what everyone, either maybe because no one really understands, it's a bit too complicated, they think. Well, it's also about geopolitics, and they really support the strategy to continue to keep our nations safe for that. So, really happy to do that. Now, on our national policy on AI, that was not without reason. It was because of a very unfortunate policy in the past. In 2017, it came to light that the tax office used an algorithm to find a fraud in the system for childcare benefits. And it turned out that 30,000 people were selected by the system as fraudsters. And they had to pay thousands and thousands of euros back to the authorities. Well, in the end, they were not fraudsters. But it was just biased, the whole system, selecting on migration criteria, ethnic criteria, and for the reason, because of poverty, they were selected. So it was a real point of shame for us, really an embarrassment for the government. It was initially also denied, because the policies were, we have to be tough on the fraud. But then it came up to the light, also by one politician together, actually also a politician from different side of the aisle. They worked together in fighting this misuse of algorithms by the government. So there was really a need also. We are still struggling today with solving this issue. It hasn't been solved, and we're already working on that for years. So it was a very hard lesson, and we said we have to do something. And the state secretary who was responsible, who's right now responsible for digitalization, was before responsible for solving part of that crisis. And now she's thought, well, I'm in my new capacity, I really have to develop a policy to avoid in the future similar, I would say, disasters, because it's a really disaster for so many families. Now, the principles in that policy is that everyone should be able to participate in the digital age and should be able to trust the digital world and be able to govern their own digital life. And as a government, as a digital government, we should lead by example, operating openly and transparently. So transparency, that's a crucial part in our new policy. And also it should be clear that when AI, generative AI, is being used, that it's clearly labeled and obvious for everyone that it's is the case. Now, there are 3 instruments being used now also through the new policy. The first is an algorithm register for the government bodies. And it's right now a voluntary system, but it's set to become mandatory in due course. And right now we have 130 public bodies who have registered their algorithms in the system. And it's a total of 375 last week's counts. Algorithms being registered in that system, providing details on what they are for and how their use will intersect in people's rights. It's an entirely open system, accessible for everyone, also so for other countries, if they want to learn about it, it's available for you as well to have a look at it. And we're also in the process of developing an AI and algorithm implementation framework for the public sector. And this establishes rules and guidelines for the public sector bodies implementing AI and algorithms in their business processes and translate these into practical requirements for software engineers, procurement officers and policymakers alike. And finally, the third one is together with the University of Utrecht, we developed the Human Rights and Algorithm Impact Assessment. And this has been already done dozens of times to really value the impact of algorithms on possible and the inflictment on human rights. Now, these 3 instruments, they dovetail excellently with the EU AI Act. And also with the Council of Europe's Framework Convention on AI, Democracy and Human Rights, and the Rule of Law. Both have been adopted only recently. So our objective of this policy is just never again, that we really do our level best to avoid again such a scandal, and that we have again the use of such a biased system, which is hard to avoid because that's one of the major challenges, which was also mentioned, I think, by Phil in the first panel, that's still a big risk of AI, how it's being trained. Thank you.
Thanks, Ernst. So you pointed at Phil. That's great because that's where I was going next in terms of how do we avoid a potential transatlantic divide in terms of regulation. We know there are certainly different ways of looking at this regulatory approach. We know that China is making strides, certainly less burdened by these ethical human rights considerations. So, Anne-Marie, where do we fit in, and how do we, make sure that we stay closely coordinated and aligned with our US partners?
We have very high hopes for Puglia in 10 days. I do believe that the G7 as a coordinating mechanism on a very high-level principle is incredibly important. Add to that when President Xi and President Biden met at the sites of the APEC meeting in December in San Francisco last year, the one thing I think they sort of agreed on was to continue bilateral conversations on artificial intelligence, on the very sort of high-risk aspects of it. On the transatlantic partnership in this, when I'm in Washington, D.C., and also when I'm out in Silicon Valley, actually, I hear less division than one might think. There's a recognition the Europeans do it differently than Americans, and that's how it's always been. We regulate, and they do, industry self-regulation. Parts of that is, I think it's a more an American approach. A second one is probably, if you think around Congress' ability to get anything through. Our equivalent in Brussels is a little bit more nimble and agile in that. But if you look at the fundamentals of the AI Act, and if you look at the White House executive order, they're not that different. They're not that different. What the US can do right now, because they don't have the same regulatory process, is they can move a little faster. And they want to do it in a way that it does not hinder innovation. And we need to figure out, as I said in the beginning, how do we implement the EU AI Act so it does not hinder innovation, but does the opposite. That it relatively, in a short amount of time, gives clarity to developers, to companies, to software engineers, how to use AI, and then allows for that level playing field. I think a second thing that is critical to the transatlantic relationship in the coming months and coming years is figuring out how do we make sure that the benefits and opportunities of artificial intelligence is harnessed on both sides. That is not the case right now, not entirely. And the conversations that's been around export control on large language models, both open source and closed source, is very much something that merits a conversation in the Transatlantic Technology and Trade Council. I think everyone who spoke to a person who's been part of the Technology and Trade Council, the TTC, knows that it's the technology part that's doing best, maybe a little less on trade. As we might look in, we're going to have a new commission. There might be a new guy in the White House thinking about how to continue a dialogue on making sure there's a level playing field, and this does not become Europe against the US. And that is why I want to go back to this question of European innovation. I think that the transatlantic relationship fundamentally is worse off when we're not innovating and doing our part. It's a little bit like a relationship. If it's only one person doing all the work and the other one lagging a little bit behind, it is hard to keep that balanced. It will allow us to stand stronger, regardless of who is in Brussels and who is in Washington, D.C., if we have more to offer both ways and are not only so dependent on American technology. It will also be better for America, and it will be better for the Western Alliance. I was with, if I just might take this to some of the other, I think, crises and conflicts that Europe is standing, the war that continues going on in Ukraine and how it's going to affect. As I said before, I think the new commission will be one on economic security, industrial policy, and defense. If we look at defense, it's been a vehicle for developing technology for so long. And if we, again, outsource that from outside of this continent, we're going to lose both on the opportunities, but also the momentum to actually defend ourselves. And I went with NATO Assistant Secretary General David van Wiel to Silicon Valley a few months ago. And again, half of all the people we met, they were Europeans. Half of them. All of them, they moved their company abroad or they went there as soon as they got their degree. And we asked them, how do you think about NATO security, European security, the alliance ability to harness advanced technologies for defending Ukraine, for defending Europe? And they said, look, we look to Washington, and we don't really look further. And so by insisting that the transatlantic relationship is not an asymmetrical one, but one there's more balance, with a stronger Europe that will also be meaningful for a stronger US and for a stronger NATO, it'll be stronger for a Western alliance in this, is absolutely critical. And so everyone who can do their part, we cannot institutionalize friendship and relationship transatlantically. But everything we can do to find meaningful ways, regardless of who is in power in what place, to ensure that there is alignment on this, that we're working towards the same goal, I think is going to be critical for diplomats like us in the coming year. And in Puglia. So high hopes and expectations.
The pressure's on you. Thank you, Annemarie. And you know, so NATO, team sport, community, partners. There's of course these are words, concepts that keep coming back in the conversation. Industry is obviously an entire community that is at the forefront of the global competition on AI. Annemarie highlighted how we need to be doing more in that space with our domestic industrial partners. But do you believe, Massimo, that we are, truly engaging enough in terms of a multi-stakeholder process with our European actors here to drive innovation, to help them attract talent, retain talent, attract funding?
I think we are doing a lot to fill the gap that has been clear in front of us from the beginning of this debate, especially on artificial intelligence, but in general, the Italian agency, for example, though young institution, has at the core of the business the support and the promotion and the cooperation with the private sector to develop research, industry, and products. Also highlighting and creating programs that are done to accelerate this process, because we have to fill a gap that is quite deep. So we are assisting the network of research institutions and companies in order to have an ecosystem which grows fast and is supported, that does not have to escape or leave Italy or Europe or searching for better opportunity somewhere else. We have a network, for example, around the supercomputer that Leonardo built and connected with the university center. And in this European network, which make resources all together at the benefit of ideas, researchers, startup. We funded a program for the innovative industry, which assists from the moment there is an idea growing for PhD programs at university, and then accompanying in the development of startup, validation of the program through a market analysis that has been granted to this young company, let's say, up to the entering the market and fundraising for developing the idea, the project. And we have established since the beginning a strong relationship with companies. That was an easy process due to the fact that the Italian law identified a large number of companies, the critical one, which will be increasing in number with the NIS 2 directive. And we have a pool of companies that works with the state institution on cybersecurity, and one of the points is also developing, being innovative for the purpose both of the agencies, the companies itself, and for the market. So I'm pretty confident that the path has been highlighted in a way, and there will be hopefully progress soon. But this is at the center of the process, you know. It's not only defending or protecting the system through technologies, police, or money invested in the security system, but is equally distributing resources to help these innovative technology and innovative minds that we have certainly in our school system, university, and industry.
Thank you, Massimo. I have a few more questions for our speakers, but I'd already like to encourage the audience to start thinking about theirs when we open up to the floor in a few minutes. Ernst, Anne-Marie, maybe, do you have any thoughts? Do you want to weigh in on how we encourage, drive, stimulate innovation, partnership with industry here in Europe?
Well, first of all, I mean, I always have to highlight there's also a cultural difference which is difficult to bridge with the policies. In Europe, if you go bankrupt as a company, you failed, and people turn their back to you. In the US, in California, whatever, if you go bankrupt, great, you tried something. And still venture capitalists who are willing, if you have new ideas and new energy, to come up with funding. So that's a cultural difference which is really hard to bridge. And at the same time, I don't think it's all doom and gloom in Europe. I mean, we also have Spotify is in Europe, Booking.com is in Europe, and we have lots of small and medium-sized companies which indeed often move when they grow to the US, but still the energy is there, and we really have to, you know, to look in what to create an ecosystem which really benefits also the small, medium-sized companies. So that's still a challenge how to do that. I don't believe regulation is always limiting. I mean, also our regulation on the environmental policies is also driving innovation into being more energy efficient, coming with new energy alternatives. So you see also in the car industry, lots of regulation, up to the tail light is regulated in Europe, in the world, and still you see a lot of innovation. So I don't think it's a limiting factor.
Just adding three things. The Mario Draghi report and also the Letta report, I think both pointed to this question around capital markets. There's a tremendous amount of capital in Europe. We're just not very good at harnessing and venture capital and up to Series D funding. And so thinking about how to do that more easily, also across our borders, that would be one. Two, often when I have a young entrepreneur, he or she comes and says, I want to go international, I'm going to go to the US. And I say, why don't you go to Paris? I mean, I visited Station F multiple times, an incredible place. Why don't you go to Italy? Why don't you go to Berlin or Amsterdam? And there's, for some reason, most of the people, and especially entrepreneurs, they are Danes before they're Europeans, or they're Italians before they're Europeans. And when it comes to building European innovation capabilities, we got to think a little bit more like Europeans. And so there's a language, there's a culture, there's an ability for us to harness, I think, the talent across of our nations, also between the university much better in that regard. And then a third piece is on confidence. I feel that we lost confidence that we can do this at times. There's always this, oh, it's an American big tech and they're going to win again. Now, whether it's quantum computer, artificial intelligence, they're so large already, they can just invest the money that we can't do. I mean, I think Europe could use a little bit more confidence from sort of the policymakers. I often think of my job back in Denmark now as sort of bringing confidence back that of course we can. Of course Europe can be ahead of this game. And so it goes from sort of entrepreneurs to big European tech, but also to the political level.
Just add one thing which to add to the discussion is we now talk about Europe, US. One topic also in the Global Digital Compact, which is really on top of the agenda, is the digital divide. But through AI and the new industry on the developing generative AI, we fear that the divide is even increasing and that they're way far further behind. And that's really a challenge also, how to keep them on board and how to keep them involved, or to involve them, not keep them involved, how to involve them and make sure that you're not further lagging behind, which is already happening. So that's a real challenge for us as an international community.
Of course, and hopefully, as Massimo, you alluded to, we see some of these concerns infused in the G7 work. Let me see where we stand on questions before if you could briefly introduce yourself. Yeah, two over there. So briefly introduce yourself and also be brief about your question.
Oh, no, okay. Sandro Geiken from Monarch. I work with investors as well, who are trying to invest in the European space and currently putting together a very large fund, 500 million, with a defense focus, because that's where a lot of private investors and funds want to put their money in. But we're very concerned about two things. The one is the stability of regulation. So it's very difficult to predict which ways regulation will go in Europe in the next years, and we need kind of stability for at least 5 to 10 years to develop products which are going to be in line with regulation and then not stopped all of a sudden. And the second bigger problem, especially in the defense space, is procurement. So that, I know you're smiling instantly. That's, of course, a very well-known problem, but in particular in the new high-tech stuff, the procurement offices just don't know what that is, so they're extra cautious, everything takes really long, and for some of the products which need a government market, a GovTech market, this is a major hindrance to get into the market in time before they run out of money from investment, so that is also a risk that we're facing. What's your vision to attack these two very structural problems?
Can we maybe bundle it with the question from the gentleman in the back?
Hi, Andreas Wallbrot from Enclave in Germany. We're a confidential compute company, and I would like to step onto that because I have a similar question. What we see very often is that in Europe, we as a young company can find research subsidies, we can find various programs that help you and give you some cash. What we see is not happening, and that is definitely pulling us very much back compared to our competitors from other continents, is that the public sector is ordering stuff. So at the end, if I have the opportunity to choose 1 million subsidies and 400k euros in a public order, I would always take the 400k, even though it's much less money than the 1 million. Because at the end of the process, I have a product that has the same quality as the one for the 1 million, but it's a sold product and not just a researched fancy thing where you then start to sell. This costs us 2 years in the sell cycle towards our international competitors from whichever continent they come. And that brings me to the question, you said people are moving west, and there's a reason why we're moving west, and I was at the RSA conference as well, and we had a lot of these discussions with many investors saying, why don't you come to Delaware, Boston? the Silicon Valley. Yeah, I met some old school friends that I went to school with near Stuttgart that went west 20 years ago, 10 years ago. What can we do to basically, besides confidence, what can we do also from a European government and enterprise sector to keep us in the middle of things and not go west or east or south for that matter? Thanks.
Thank you. I turn to my panelists. Any thoughts on the questions from the two gentlemen?
I'll go first. Let me start with this last one. There's an incredible power in procurement that we have not harnessed. It's not only on the industry side, it's also on the government side. What is the most efficient way to regulate American cloud companies? Is that regulation? Or would that be if 20 member states all said, we're going to procuring a lot of cloud over the next couple of decades? How can we use that to actually tailor much more what we want to see in a European market? So you're absolutely right. I think on the Denmark, we have the EU presidency in the second half of 2025. And not to say that this is all top of the list, but it's certainly part of the conversation how to harness this power of procurement, not least, I think, also for European industry, to see an avenue and opportunity that gives that longevity piece. And then to the first gentleman's question, again, this question of procurement. There's an average time of procurement in NATO right now from when we think about we need a capability to we finally have the product of 16.2 years. Most entrepreneurs, they have sort of an 18-month cycle, right? And I think we got to be honest with this and say that system just does not work unless you're Lockheed Martin or a very sort of large, multi-decade industry. At the same time, it's not only the multi-decade industry that's defended Ukraine. It is partly Chinese drones that's been battling a large Russian fleet in the Black Sea. And this recognition, I think, is daunting not only in NATO headquarters, but also with governments, that we've got to figure out a different procurement. And the same goes for the defense tech. So I don't have a ready answer, but know that it's very, very high on the agenda. And that this idea that not setting more obstacles, but more opportunities and avenues for fast tracking, for harnessing, and there's a risk willingness in that too that I think we're ready to take when it comes to betting on advanced technology that's not yet proven in a large scale. As you might can hear, this is also my personal conviction. That is the way we have to move in Europe. We're not fully there, but as I said before, I think the new EU Commission is going to be economic security, defense, and this will, in emerging technologies, this will be critical to it.
Now, first of all, I was glad to hear on the creation of such a fund, and it sounds promising. And indeed, we should make sure that the environment is such that indeed it will be used, this fund. On regulation and stability, that's something I think most member states also would like to see right now. You know, we have created such an ecosystem, and the whole implementation still has to take place. So I think also with now the Cyber Resilience Act still there and the EU AI Act now being adopted, now it's really important to then the whole ecosystem to look at implementation, invest in that one, implement also together with all partners. That's not something only states do. We do that together with the multi-stakeholder community on the implementation to make sure that the regulation we apply nationally is also workable for the private sector. I completely, fully agree also with the European landscape. You know, we talk about the European Union, but in many aspects it's not enough union yet, and it makes it very complex for the private sector. Your mention on the defense sector is very relevant in the Dutch case. We just had a long tender on submarines, and they want to finalize it right now. And there was also the question, do we have enough knowledge actually within those ministries to really design the tender documents, you know, the drafted the tender documents, and is the knowledge mature enough to really be able to procure in a professional way? So highly complex systems, but we need also on the government side, of course, to balance the knowledge from the private sector to have that knowledge. And finally, also the question on, you know, what should we do to avoid for companies to move west? Well, I also would like to bring the question back. What would you advise to the governments and the European Union to do? Because we have to learn from private companies what would you have done? Should we have done for you to stay in Europe? I mean, from that we can learn a lot, I think, from listening to the companies.
Well, certainly defense market defense industries is a very specific market with its own rules and needs. It's pretty complicated. I see that in Europe there is an advancement in this direction due to the awareness that certainly the things do not go the same way. There is lack of productivity, need of investing more in the process of developing system that can be used across Europe and not only for the specific client, which is the army of the country A or country B. This is also a cultural problem that has to be overcome. But we are in a situation that probably things are moving fast in this direction. I see army administrations and state ministers, government exploring new ways to address the issue of procurement in the military procurement in particular. And I think this is going on the right direction. The problem remains the matching between let's say the final clients who design what a state or an army needs and the industry. The difficulty is the timing that two have that they don't match. Also, they don't match because differently from the US, industry there has a larger market and has the possibility sometimes to fail and restart due to the enormous resources available in that market. In Europe, this is not the case. So whenever there is a large program, new program, which involve army, industry, and research, it's a bit more longer process than in the US or on the other side of the Atlantic. But things are moving.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today in order to stay on schedule. But I mean, I'm leaving this conversation certainly fairly optimistic, both in terms of cyber having potentially the edge with EU member states in consensus on how we approach regulation with some core principles of transparency, ethics at the heart of our approach, with AI as a means to mend some of the digital divide. But from what I hear also, we need to do our homework, innovate more, be more attuned to the needs of our industry, ensure that we continue building a meaningful relationship with the US, and certainly put our money where our mouth is in order to, shore up our domestic industry. Please join me in thanking our speakers today, and I think we all have a break afterwards.